You are warmly welcome to Study Right Hub channel. Please remember to subscribe, comment, like and share our videos. In my previous video presentation, I discussed with you the introduction of project risk management. We identified that risk is very important because everything we do in life is associated with risk, and the same applies to project management. Whenever undertaking a project, there is the need to identify potential risk and put in measures to mitigate those risks. We also realize that it is very important to anticipate that risk will occur. In today's video presentation, we will talk more about the project risk identification and project risk assessment. When we talk about project risk identification, what do we mean by risk identification? Risk identification is the process of systematically identifying all possible risk events which may impact a project. Yes, so the process that is involved to determine the specific risk factors that can reasonably be affecting the project objective is the risk identification. So what it means is that the project team together with the project manager tries to identify reasonable risk that is expected to affect the project while it's being implemented. So that is the project risk identification. You anticipate the possible risk that are likely to occur. That is the first thing that you have to do. You need to identify, to forecast, and then determine which risk is more specific or which risk is likely to occur to the successful completion of the project. There are types of risk that are likely to affect the successfully completing the project. Some of the risks may range from financial risk. The financial risk refers to the financial exposure that the firm opens itself to when developing a project. So the financial risk, it helps the project team to realize that the budget amount, will it be enough to complete the project, or there will be the need at one point in time to acquire extra amount of money to invest in the projects. So what is the likelihood that the budget amount will complete the projects? That is the financial risk. And then we have the technical risk. The technical risk talks about when new project contains unique technical elements or unproven technology, in the sense that some projects may require special aspects or expertise to attend to. So do the project team has that expertise to develop that project? Can they successfully maneuver things to ensure that the quality of the project's deliverables are achieved? So the risk element or the risk involved in coming up with that quality product will be the technical risk. And also we can have contractual or legal risk. The contractual or the legal risk is a form of risk that is often consistent with the projects in which strict terms and conditions are being drawn even in advance. So the project that is being undertaken, does it conform with local rules and regulation standards and policies? It can be a risk. So whenever a project is being undertaken, it needs to comply with local laws so that it does not lead to a law case. Also, there can be a supply risk. The supply risk is associated with the supply chain disruptions. So it can arise because of the market instability or sometimes scarcity of resources. Sometimes it can even lead to the supplier failure or supply disruption. Sometimes force majeure elements can occur in such a way that there was no fault of either the supplier or the buyer, but there will be a disruption because of natural interventions. It can be heavy downpour or accident on the part of no parties, which can lead to a risk. And when there is a delay in supply, we know time is also a crucial element when it comes to projects. So it can affect the time to deliver the project on time. So these and many other types of risks can happen and affect the project. So in the identification of risks, project teams together with the project manager try to identify possible risk that can affect the project. Either fall of these or any other risks that can affect the project will be identified. We move on to the next stage of the risk management steps. Risk assessment. What is risk assessment? After the potential risk has been identified, the project team together with the project manager try to evaluate each risk on the chances that the risk event will occur. And should it occur, what is the loss associated with it? Or in other words, when the risk occurs, what will be the consequence on the project? And remember, not all consequences of events are equal. Not all risks are equal. So the consequence of one risk may not be the same as the consequence of the other risks. So identifying and assessing the risks will help the project team to know where attention should be focused and where attention should not be focused. So in determination of the risk value, whether the risk is intense or not, one risk calculation that is being done is the determination of risk factor. To calculate for the risk factor, there is the need to identify two major components. That is the probability of failure. With the probability of failure, we are interested in identifying any factors that can significantly affect the probability that the new project can be successfully completed. So a potential cause of failure. What can be a source of failure for the project? So for this, let's consider a construction of or developing an IT project for a company. And let us also assume that the issues identified to be a potential contributor of failure is the maturity of the software. So is it a new product or it is based on existing software platform? Also, another contributor can be the complexity of the product. Is the design relatively simple or it is highly complex in structure? And then the third contributor can be dependency. So can the product be developed independently of the system currently being used, or it is tied up in the operating system of the company? So if you have these three contributing factors, then you move on to calculate the average of the contributing factors. And then we also consider the consequence of failure. The consequence of failure, we are concerned with the issues that will highlight the effects of the project failure. So when the likelihood of a project risk will occur, what will be the potential impact or the consequence on the organization? So let's assume, for example, the IT development project we mentioned earlier. It can happen that the organization can identify several critical effects on the project should it fail. It can happen that the costs. So what will happen to the budget? Will it overrun or it will be within budget? What about schedule? Will it be on time or there will be potential delays in the project? What about reliability? That's the quality of the finished product. What will be the effect on the quality of the product? And performance, how well the new software perform when it is completed. So these are possible effects that can happen to the project should the risk happens. So there is the need to also identify the average of the elements that will also occur. But remember that these factors are subjective depending on the type of project and also the team and then the project manager. So it is subjective. So by way of calculating the project risk factor, there is the need to calculate the probability of failure and then the consequence of failure. So we find the average of the contributing factors. So first of all, you calculate the probability of failure, that is PF, by adding the three categories or the three contributing factors, and then you divide it by 3. So if it is 3 contributing factors, you divide it by 3. If the project team identify 4 contributing factors, you divide it by 4. If it is 5 contributing factors, you divide it by 5 to find the average. So you will get a formula like this. The probability of failure equals the PM, the probability of maturity of the project team, the complexity of the product, and then the dependency of the product. And then you find the average by dividing it by 3. You do the same for the consequence of failure as well. So if it is 4, you divide it by 4. If the contributing factors are 5 or more, you divide it by the number of the contributing factors. So if the contributing factor is costs, schedule, reliability, performance, you divide it. And even if you are able to identify other factors, if it becomes 6, you divide it by 6, and then you continue like that. So when you do that, you can get the PF and then the CF, that is the probability of failure and then the consequence of failure. And these two will help you calculate for your risk factor. So now, what is the formula for calculating the risk factor? The risk factor is equal to the summation of probability of failure and the consequence of failure, all minus probability of failure multiplied by consequence of failure. There is a rule of thumb. If you calculate the risk factor and then you get a risk less than 0.3, that risk is considered to be low risk. If you get between 0.3 and 0.7, it is considered as medium risk, and if you get more than 0.7, it is considered as higher risk. So what have we discussed so far? We have discussed the risk identification that talks about anticipating possible risk events that will affect the project's objective. And then the risk assessment talking about the likelihood and then the effects the risk will have on the project. We have also learned how to calculate the risk factor to determine the level of risk that will affect the project, whether it is low risk, the medium risk, or higher risk. After calculating the risk factor, what mitigation strategy will be employed? It depends on the level of risk. In my next video, I will discuss with you the risk mitigating strategies that will be employed by project managers, irrespective of the level of risks involved. Please remember to subscribe, comment, like, and share our videos. Thank you.